happy to kick that off then. Welcome to another episode of Catalyzing Radical Systemic Change, where in my own words, it's all about mapping and cross-pollinating the various building blocks that I think we need to consider to building a thriving, healthy, just and green planetary civilization for the many generations after us. So today it's my great pleasure to be in the room together with Jake Knight. And just to frame the conversation, so the header we found together is Stewarding Wealth as a Force for Good. So I'm not born in wealth. And I know when I was growing up, there were all sorts of like prejudices I had, things I received, things I did not know. And then sometimes along my way, I met people of wealth. And the first thing I found out is wealth doesn't equal happiness, for example. So some poor people are happy, some wealthy people are not happy. And I also learned a lot about myself, my upbringing, my values, my, let's say, cultural regime with which I grew up. Which is rather left-wing, alternative, saving the planet kind of background, as most of the listeners who have listened into one of my podcasts know very well about. So in this podcast, I want to have a very humane discussion with somebody who holds wealth, which I find just really interesting because wealth and stewarding wealth, as we will find out in this podcast, is not always the same. And how can we make it a force for good? And also we found out just literally 5 minutes, starting this like Zoom room together, that there seems to be something around the word prejudice, because there are so many prejudices and projections around wealth, especially from people that have no bloody fucking idea what wealth actually means, because they're not born in the context, they don't hold financial wealth, so they basically don't know what they're talking about. So that's the start. And like always in my podcast, for me, it's very important to feel the person in the room. So, hey, Jake, super happy to have you on the podcast. And like always, I want to start with your own biography. And what are like 2 or maybe 3 pivotal moments in your biography that connected you to the overall header of today's conversation, which is stewarding wealth as a force for good. So, dear listeners, super happy to introduce you, Jake. And yeah, just curious, when did this pop up first in your biography? When did you become aware that there was wealth around you, but maybe not around other people? Or how did that impact you as a child or adolescent or adult?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Alistair. Happy to talk, and can talk a lot about the experience of wealth. And so, kind of background: born and raised in Phoenix, Arizona. I grew up in Middle America, and so really feel connected to just being a normal person in a normal neighborhood. And through that process, my father was in trucking, and I would have been in probably kindergarten, first grade, when he started his own trucking company. Him and his 2 brothers, him and his brother and their cousins, which were another set of brothers. And so as I grew, that company had success. That company went on shortly after the founding in 90 to go public in 94. So pretty fast ramp. And so I would have been in 3rd, 4th grade. And that's when I first started noticing that having wealth made me different. Especially at school and in my neighborhood. And one of the impacts for me, in some ways, is really cool, but in other ways wasn't necessarily positive, is like my last name's on our trucks. So you can't really escape the family business. Whereas some people, it's like some XYZ technologies, and so people don't see it. Our family business was really in the forefront of people's minds. And I even remember, kids would drive from Phoenix to LA to go to Disneyland, and they would come back and be like, "Oh my gosh, we counted 58 of your trucks on I-10." And like, in some ways that's cool, right? And I'm proud of that. And in others, it was really, kind of confusing, because it started melding my identity and how people viewed me with the business, the wealth, something that I actually had nothing to do with. So that kind of built over time as the company became larger and better known. To where really probably another pivotal moment was kind of middle school and early high school. I really became aware of the differences. We were still living in a neighborhood that was a nice neighborhood. The next wealthiest person was probably the local dentist or doctor. There wasn't any poverty that I was aware of. So it was just kind of through and through middle America. But as kids do, as they get older, they become more judgmental. They can be harsh, and that was actually a really negative experience for me, because the judgment, I didn't understand why I was being judged for something I had no say in. And it was kind of, there were messages of, "You'll never have to work hard, you get anything you want," right? Just these through lines that were really confusing through those years. And then, fast forward from there, I remember kind of towards late high school, as you kind of step into your voice, or I stepped into my voice, I actually became a little, just, I wouldn't say ruthless, but upset with people, and really frustrated when people would make comments or devalue my accomplishments and attribute it to my dad's wealth. Um, and so those were kind of the early childhood experiences of wealth. And then fast forward kind of to the next phase of my life. I married my high school sweetheart, Misty. I don't advise this path to anyone, but we got married, bought a house, started a career, and started a family, all between the age of 19 and 21. Um, it was quite a pressure cooker. And through that process, I actually went to work with my dad's business, and that was another pivotal moment as I kind of learned the business and started mapping out how to create the same level of success, right? Because as we all do, all we know is our own experience, especially when we're young and especially in our 20s, right? We don't start getting those bigger life perspectives and thinking beyond that, maybe 30s and beyond, usually, not always the case. But I became hyper aware of my dad's financial success, and it actually became crushing. I mean, that's part of my story is, I could not see a path to ever live up to the level of success he had had, right? And now, keep in mind, at that point in my life, the definition of success that I was operating from was a societal belief that money equals happiness, right? And I think as humans, we naturally want to do a little bit better than our parents do, right? We want to evolve, and whether that's our parenting style, our lifestyle. But my view was very narrow on success, and it became crippling and crushing. And I went through a really deep, dark um, depression that was quite debilitating. And it's a big part of my life, because that was, call it 16, 17 years ago, and that was a pivot point where I recognized I had an issue. I got into action. I started seeking help, guidance, going on my own kind of healing journey, spiritual awakening, recovery, all the above. And so since then, that's how helped me evolve um, my definition of success, as well as the nuance of my relation to wealth, and what that means. So I'll pause there, and would be happy to go further. But those were kind of the key pivotal moments, especially earlier in my life.
I think the point that touched me most is this moment in your biography, which I think we all remember. I really think most of us, is when you're becoming aware of all the programming, all the patterns, all the belief systems that basically run you, but mainly unconscious, in your example, to basically want to outcompete your dad, and your measure was financial success, and then falling into this deep and dark depression. So when I look at the people I know and my own biography, I wonder if we stay for a moment on the personal level, if that's comfortable with you, because for whatever reason, I really don't know why, it seems growth almost, I'm not saying only, but almost inevitably is fueled by very painful experiences. So I don't think we need to know all the details of the depression, but can you sketch the listeners your awakening process and becoming aware of their circumstances and the patterns and belief systems and your cultural conditionings in that process? And what were actually the steps that helped you get out of that to basically disentangle your relationship with wealth and your upbringing, and defining it as your sole measure of, let's call it, a good life? I'm just curious to
Yeah.
further listen in.
Yeah. So a couple things came to mind. One, to your point, you evolve and develop beliefs along the way. And one of the things I really thought I could do, especially as a teenager, was prove my worth, right? Do things that would allow people to see my results as my results, and my effort and my hard work as mine. And so to a in a way that, actually looking back, was not a healthy adaptation, and was really the beginnings of like numbing depression, as well as workaholism, and using that and productivity, using that as what kept me fueled and going. And so I remember, I was never the most talented athlete. However, I loved to play baseball. I became a good player, and I worked my ass off. I was always the first there. I was the last to leave. I was doing speed camps. I was getting extra coaching, and so I was a 4-year letterman as a varsity baseball player. I started every game except the first game. They had a senior start. He made a couple of errors, and then I got a shot and played well. And even through that, there were rumblings, or people who would kind of say, like, even directly to me, like, oh, well, that's because your dad donated money, or whatever, right? Really, really devaluing. So that was kind of a chip on my shoulder of like, I am going to prove my worth to the world through results and through showing them that I can do things that aren't related to my family's wealth. To end cap that, it never worked. It still doesn't work. And I finally came to the conclusion that like haters hate, right? People who want to judge or bring others down, you're not going to convince them otherwise by what your performance or achievements are. So fast forward through that process, that was kind of when I got to work, I really was going down this path of being a workaholic, and I was for all purposes. I was a workaholic. That's what fed me. That's what allowed me to not feel. That's what allowed me to numb whatever was going on inside me, and to really play into the narrative that I had learned through my through societal beliefs, right? And so what really changed me is two things. The birth of my daughter. That cracks something open, and I'll be emotional because it still touches my heart. And I remember that moment sitting with her, having her in my arms, and being like, whoa, like this beautiful little being is my responsibility, right? And so that opened something up into me that I had never fully experienced. And kids do this. And then fast forward, I think because of that, I started becoming more aware that I was going down a path, repeating some of the behaviors that maybe didn't feel good to me as a child, right? My dad, I love my dad. He worked really hard. I have a lot of perspective now as I'm much older, and can see that he was engaged. He did make a point to be on vacation with us and go to my ball games and those kinds of things. But nonetheless, I think, as we all do, there were certain things that weren't always the best experience, and that kind of opened me up to realizing, wow, if I continue on the path I'm on, I'm gonna be doing the same thing to this beautiful little child who has so deeply touched me. And so a couple years later, she would have been around 2 years old, was when I was experiencing deep depression. And I went from super high performing, I mean, wake up at 4:30 to get a workout in, to be at the office by 6:30 or 7, work all day, come home, have dinner, work more, travel as much as needed. So I couldn't get out of bed. I remember, I remember her coming and tugging on me saying, "Dad, let's play." Right? Sweet little 2-year-old being, just a beautiful little soul. And that was a pivotal moment of like, I knew I had a problem, right? I knew I was suffering and struggling, and I was confused, and I knew me and Misty were arguing, and I was confused by that because I loved her, but everything felt out of control. But when that happened with my daughter, that is what led me to getting into intentional action. And so at that time, I went into a treatment center, a 30-day inpatient, specifically for depression, anxiety. And that really was my beginning to like learning about spirituality, meditation, mindfulness, trauma, right? All of these things that prior to then I had no language for. That wasn't something we we ever talked about. And of course, my parents' generation, that wasn't, really what they were talking or thinking about. Um, and so that was, in my mind, the really pivotal moment, which then led me to go on and really start evaluating some of the beliefs I had. And one of those, I was also raised quite religious in the Mormon religion, and there's some incredible values that I still hold dear to this day that I learned from that experience. But the experience of that religion for me was also quite guilt ridden and shaming, and kind of reinforced for me that not enoughness. Like, you always got to be doing more, being more, providing more value, doing more service, which was suffocating for me, because like I naturally already do those things, and then to feel like it's not, it's never going to be enough, and you just got to keep up leveling, um, was overwhelming. And so through that process, I decided that I was going to leave the church and just kind of go do my own spiritual practice and explore various things. And that's where I stand today. I'm not religious. I have a lot of very close friends who are very religious, and who use that as part of their spiritual practice. But I've found other ways, and I actually have come to enjoy the curiosity that comes with not having a set structure of beliefs that I have to abide by, per se. And so those two things were really pivotal moments, because the inpatient, as well as leaving the church, really kind of opened me up to then what's been 16 plus years of like constant self-exploration and healing and new experiences and curiosities.
I want to hop on the curiosity train and both invite you to stay curious, as well as invite the curiosity of listeners, especially those who don't have exposure to, knowledge of, or having inherited wealth. So in this next chapter of the podcast, I'm inviting you, and I'm curious if you can disentangle and get a little bit meta, but stay emotional and curious at the same time. When you look at your close friends, especially the long-term companions, but also other wealth holders, are there certain patterns that you think or sense from your own biography that other wealth holders struggle with? There's this almost this like bucket of like prejudice, and you need to cope with basically all these projections that other people have on you, and disentangle basically your own value as a human being, your own achievements, your hard work, your example with baseball, from basically the fact that other people basically think this is an easy life you're having. So is there a certain set of patterns that you sense from those holding wealth that you, as, let's call it, the collective of wealth holders or so, need to work through? I'm curious to explore more the pattern beyond just the individual Jake Knight here in the podcast, if you get what I'm aiming at.
Yeah, totally. It's a great question. What I can share, and what I've experienced, and what I've seen a lot, is a pattern of isolation. And it comes across as odd, because most wealth creators or wealth holders are pretty active, right? They're out doing business stuff, investment stuff, philanthropy, community work. So it seems odd to feel isolated in that environment. And what ends up happening is because of the judgments, or as you say, prejudices. There's a tendency to kind of compartmentalize that part of your life, right? And not open up about maybe the more vulnerable parts of your life. Because if society believes money equals happiness, and you hold money, or you have access to money, and you have real people challenges, as we all do, or human challenges that we experience, then it's really easy to just be like, well, what's your problem? Or quit complaining, or right. It's easy to be those feelings you're having to be, devalued, or people say you're not okay for having real human challenges because of your family money. So I see isolation oftentimes. Money can really insulate as well, where people will just surround themselves only with other people who have similar situation as it relates to wealth, right? And so then they kind of live this really insulated, weird life, where it's like from gala to gala and philanthropy to philanthropy. And yes, they're trying to do good and help the world, but like they're never actually on the ground and interviewing the people and understanding what the actual challenges or problems are that they're seeking to solve or assist in. And so I recognize this. Like we were talking about my upbringing, there was a point in time where I wish my parents would have been more open about talking with us as we were all experiencing this judgment and being teased for being rich kids and all these things. We didn't really talk about it. And so that was very isolating. What I realized was my parents were going through the same thing. And so their friends who they used to maybe go to Olive Garden with for dinner, because now they had significant wealth, the assumption was that they would no longer go to Olive Garden, right? That they only go to Ruth Chris, or you name the expensive exclusive brand. And so they lost a lot of friendships and they faced a lot of judgment. So now I have empathy and compassion for them and what that experience was like for them. The last piece I would just add that I don't think is well understood is the complexity. Wealth creates a level of complexity that is oftentimes misunderstood, and I especially see this with younger adults in their 20s and 30s who are being asked by their family to understand the full picture of wealth while also figuring out who they are and building their own career and dating and traveling and all those things. And the complexity is real, right? When you have to be involved in understanding trusts and estates and tax law and attorneys and risk mitigation and portfolio construction and all these things that oftentimes don't happen for most people until a much later stage in life. And sometimes for some people it's never something they have to do. They build their 401k or their retirement and they never have to evaluate these complex structures. So the complexity is also another aspect that can be quite challenging.
I already know the segue, but I feel like adding a little bit from my own experience. So first of all, I want to come back to our very first encounter. So we met at Intergen. This was a gathering of wealth holders and renegades and forward thinkers in Austin back in January. And we didn't know each other. And I had no idea who you are, but we were not talking about wealth or investment. We were having a very human conversation, about things that we were wrestling with and healing and purpose. So what I hear from you sharing, and I chose you to be in the podcast to talk about this like tension and what you're wrestling with from the human experience holding wealth, because the couple of handful examples that I know from people that have inherited wealth, especially in younger years, some of them like close friends of mine, is that I felt some of them getting burdened by apathy, almost this like, well, I'm studying, but I will never need to work. So I don't really know what to do. So there's like, I think this crucial momentum that certainly I felt, because I won't really inherit a substantial sums, so I needed to kind of work through that. That was one feature. The other feature that I know more from like hedonistic settings is like people can get totally absorbed in a parallel reality of almost virtual experiences, from dating endless pretty girls, a common feature with young men, to parties, drug abuse, to then also really serious mental health issues. And I'm mentioning all of this because I'm curious to listen in before we segue into the next chapter of the podcast. How did you find your tribe and continue? Because what I feel is a very honest encounter in between the two of us, and the true wrestling with yourself and where you're standing in life and what you want to manifest in your purpose and your legacy, which we will dive in deeper into the podcast later. But to start the segue is like, how did you find your tribe? Because I know also a lot of people from privilege or wealth or status, sometimes even people that have status don't necessarily have wealth. Also for me, I needed to disentangle that, or just because you have a big family name doesn't mean the money that your family has is on your bank account. Also, this I needed to disentangle just because it's a big name. And it feels almost like a burden, because you as a human being, you as Jake Knight, how can you really discern an honest human interest from a shadow interest of, I don't know, wanting to receive funding for a startup, or your contacts to philanthropic institutions? So how did you find your tribe, and how do you build your tribe? I think that's a beautiful segue then into like, Enclave and what you're aiming to build and where you're standing with that.
Yeah, great question. And I think that's ongoing, and will be a lifelong journey. But what I realized is, yes, there happens to be a lot of people who are after you, right? Who you have a couple of situations. And I remember as a teenager grappling with that, like, are these people my friends, or do they just love that I have a cool truck and they want to be hanging out with the kid who has a cool truck? Right. So that was a really weird experience to go through. And then fast forward into adulthood. And as you start building businesses and investments, like, I remember worrying deeply as I was running my own businesses of like, being taken advantage of, right? I've been stolen from. A lot of business owners have, but there was definitely, I've been in, I think 6 or 7 lawsuits. I've won them all, but there's definitely, as I look back at that, there was somebody who recognized my name and figured there was a pot of gold that maybe they would just get paid off to go away. Um, so over time, I think you become hyper aware, very attuned, and really trying to figure out what people's motivations are, and you realize life is very reciprocal, right? So it's like when we met, we didn't know that we would continue to chat every once in a while about all things life and be doing this podcast, but we both took a genuine interest and a genuine curiosity into where we come from and what our backgrounds are and where the intersection points are. And so I do think, I know for me, I've become pretty hyper aware that if my antenna starts sensing that somebody's after me for something, or it's not reciprocal, then I'm pretty quick to move on. Does that answer the
Mhm.
question you were kind
No,
of getting
absolutely.
at?
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel I would like to stay in this like pain point. Um, just weighing my words, which I'm not often doing, is I think it's so painful for every human being to figure out in each life phase in the rearview mirror, like this classical, you're a decade older, you're celebrating your 40th birthday and you remember your 30th birthday. And then you see this decade and then like, who are your friends? Where are you with yourself? What is your family situation? What is your health? Did you find your purpose? Did you find peace in your heart, or at least more peace? All of these very foundational, very humane questions. And just to take from what you shared, for me as Alistair, as the opposite side in this podcast, doing the interview with you, Jake, is I find it like an immensely painful perspective to even just sense into that, on top of all the complexity of human interactions, business partners, investment decisions to be taken, that then even with, let's say, people you like or vibe with, need almost like an additional antenna as a wealth holder to not fall prey to people that want to abuse you and want to cheat on you or just get some money out of you, like like in Las Vegas, because you're not a machine, you're a human being, you have values. So I think what I'm aiming at to answer is, what is the right equilibrium, be it a friend or a business partner, to hold a relationship, and maybe sometimes also have an ask and say, hey, Jake, I know we're friends, but I also know you're investing, and I don't know, I'm built that local organic ice cream store, just randomly making this up, in the local town. This is going well, and I don't know other investors. You're my friend. Could we talk about that? Could you think of helping me expand this into a chain of organic ice cream stores in the region? I don't know, but just to take this as an example, what is the right balance? Where would you say the antenna goes on and says, I don't want to talk to that person? Or where could you, just basically appreciate or acknowledge is the right word in English, acknowledge that this may be a genuine connection, but since you yourself as well as have connections to other investors, this may be a valuable support for that ice cream store story guy. Let's just make it this story. What's the right balance?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, what comes to mind for me, what I've seen a lot is there's 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 this whole spectrum, right, of wealth and how we identify with wealth and how the wealth gets integrated into our life. And so on one end of the spectrum, and you see this sometimes, there's individuals who box that off, compartmentalize it, and they live a life hidden from that wealth. right? So they live where they've disassociated. Nobody in their friend groups, nobody in their life knows that they come from a family or have a trust fund or are flying to board meetings in New York. It's really quite odd and quite sad, right? That someone would feel, and I know individuals and have heard stories around this where one life they live is doing amazing community building in kind of their lane of expertise, and the other life they live is being this board member, family leader, and the two worlds never mix. The two worlds actually don't even know about each other. So that's a very disintegrated way to live. The other end of the spectrum is over identifying with the wealth, right? And being the wealth is me and the wealth is power and I am powerful because I hold this. And so we see tons of examples of that on social media of, whatever, being on the yachts and the airplanes and really over identifying with with the wealth. I think as I've matured and as I've looked at it, I've went through phases of both and really looked to be in the middle, to where it's very much part of my story and the cards I was dealt in life, but it's also not who I am, and it doesn't define me. And if it were all to go away tomorrow, I still have my loved ones, my friendships, the people who would show up for me to help me pick myself up and say, okay, what's next, right? What's going to be the next act? And so I think as it relates to, as you find that for yourself, right, and you find that middle ground, I I don't over identify. I don't lead with, hey, I'm Jake and my family is XYZ. However, there's some times where that comes up in conversation. There's some times where people connect the dots or had a family member who used to work with our family, right? There's sometimes we purposely moved to where we live, Truckee, away from Phoenix. One of the reasons we wanted to move was not to hide from our last name, but to have more autonomy and independence, and not have that at the forefront of every new relationship we had. And Truckee, Lake Tahoe, there's so much wealth here from old money, Silicon Valley, that people always ask, what's it like to live in Truckee? And I say, you go to the local coffee bar and you're sitting next to two guys in flannel shirts. One of them is paycheck to paycheck, loving the stoke on the mountain and chasing the next powder day. The other one just sold his company for $1 billion, and you wouldn't be able to tell who's who, because that's not what they're focused on. They're not there to talk about the money. They're there to talk about lifestyle. Do you like to ski? Do you like to snowboard? What do you like to do in the summer? And so that's been a healthy way for me to have a healthy distance, to be able to meet people, have relationships with people. I mean, I've had people that I've mountain biked with for a year and a half that I mention I'm going on a business travel or whatever. We get talking about what each other does in their work life. And there's all these crazy intersections that we're like, oh, we got to talk about business sometimes, because we could learn and support each other. So I think it starts with the individual having to kind of get clear on who they are, what's important to them, how are they going to integrate that part of their story and part of their life, holistically. And then the other thing that I've found, um, as I look for friendships, I don't base it on socioeconomic situations, right? I have friends who are in similar situations to me. I have friends who are building their own wealth, who are, you know, first generation wealth creators. I have friends who work for those friends, or who work for entrepreneurs or large corporations. And then I have friends who quite frankly have had struggles financially, and because we're focused on real relationships and authenticity and vulnerability, we've always been able to navigate the feelings we've had or the challenges that the wealth has created, because there are you there are power dynamics at play, right? That come up. Who's paying for what? What if out of the goodness of my heart I see someone struggling, and I want to buy their family dinner or take them out on my boat, right? How do you navigate that without creating a power imbalance or them needing my support? And vice versa. How do I, coming from a world where those things may not really change my financial outcome much, how do I also accept that from others, right? And that's been a muscle I've been working on and learning. Like, I used to never let anybody pay for me. Like, I just always, that was my habit of like, I need to pay, I need to pay. And it's taken me time that when somebody offers to pay, for me to say, wow, that's really kind. I'm totally happy if you would like to do that. So hopefully that answers it. It's really getting clear on your own internal integration, and then from there you get a much better sense of why people are wanting to be in relation with you. And is it to get something, right, financially, or is it because they really enjoy you, and the conversation's great and they're learning and I'm learning, and we just genuinely want to do life together?
Mm-hmm. I think it's a perfect segue into, I think, a difficult word. It's called purpose. So before I ask you a couple of questions, which is usually more my way than asking one question, it's more a set of questions and then people tie into that. I think it took me a long while to understand that for me, purpose is not static. I had, ever since early childhood, a big zest for life, to understand life, from being the ballet dancer and then the macroeconomist, and now an impact entrepreneur, now building my own portfolio one, so building my own wealth journey. And I became aware that for me, almost purpose for me became clearer in the rear view mirror. So I was one of those who, for very painful reasons, started this like awakening and healing journey very early, just because my ballet career collapsed and I never wanted to do anything else. That was my life equaled I'm a ballet dancer. So in as much as you were saying people over-identify with wealth, I was over-identifying with wanting to be the best ballet dancer because I was a solo ballet dancer. And when that crumbled down, that was very painful. And I think then my main purpose was enlightenment, not therapy, really, because I was too young to understand therapy. I was reading these spiritual books from these big names like Jiddu Krishnamurti or Osho or Chogyam Trungpa or Sogyal Rinpoche, or all of these big, shiny beings. And I was 17 when I started the journey, and I said, I want that. Kind of, they tell you can't get it, but obviously everybody wants it. So you read the books and then you go on meditation retreats and Vipassana, and you learn about Zen Buddhism and all of that stuff. And I found it incredibly painful and difficult. And then in my somewhat mid-20s, I didn't get depression, but like things got so haywire in my life that I became aware, wait, somewhere you heard there is a thing called therapy. And I'm like, nah, talking with somebody about my family and my relationships and my abusive tendencies, like substance abuse, mainly alcohol. I'm like, nah, that feels awkward. And then I did a behavioral, very short term intervention, I think 12 sessions or 8 sessions. And I had such a big takeaway, like such a big takeaway in like whatever 2 months, that I'm like, wow, dude, Alistair, you have been meditating for many years. It seems you have quite something to learn in therapy. And since I'm like, when I want something, I'm very disciplined. So, I started on this like therapeutical journey for many years. And then ultimately, fast forward, a word that you have been often used in this like life phase now, that at least the mirror that I get, because no healing journey can be over, because the shiny diamond that they call in Buddhism, which is whatever, just pure consciousness or pure bliss or whatever, right? Always gets dust on it just because we're making the human experience in 3D reality. You as a father, me as an aspiring father, you as a wealth holder wanting to steward wealth for something meaningful, good, and impactful, and me being the impact entrepreneur and needing to raise funds and capitalize and build the teams and build the brands and the product to make like deep impact. So that was a long preface. So let's try to tie this into a couple of questions. First of all, can you work with the word purpose? And if so, use it. If not, use another word. And what I'm curious in this specific life phase now that we're meeting, how would you articulate the purpose, and how do you tie that into Enclave? And before I end and then hand over to you, in the last primarily 9 years, where I've been focusing more on this like large scale and ultra large scale impact endeavors that you are aware of, that I won't share in this podcast, but there are other podcasts around that, like changing the financial markets, building new institutional frameworks, new governance frameworks, intergenerational wealth management, like all of these ultra large topics is it needs to be reciprocated from people in wealth to at least be open around these very difficult conversations, because the world is on fire, and just investing, randomly making this up, just investing in Tesla is impact. Yeah, okay, electric mobility may be better than burning gasoline. But when I talk about like radical systemic change, ultimately we really need to recode these the way wealth is measured, is governed, how this asset is stewarded for many generations ahead, and nobody has the perfect answer. So getting closer to asking you the question, you starting Enclave as a almost like a club of friends to start with and have deep conversations in a safe environment, show up as human beings. What is the discerning factor or pattern? Because there are other organizations out there with way more well-known names, like Nexus, for example. So why Enclave? What does this have to do with your purpose? And yeah, maybe where are you standing with Join Enclave?
Yeah, perfect. So, to answer the purpose question, like you said, that's very much evolving, right? I think we fine tune that over our lifetime. Some common themes that relate to my purpose, or how I see my purpose in this life, is really to help elevate what's possible. Um, I'm very comfortable in engaging with tension, right? This conversation we're having, there's tension, right? with what society believes, what my experience is. Me even sharing some of these things creates a level of vulnerability and judgment that's potentially there, and I'm willing to do that to kind of challenge the status quo. And if it touches somebody to understand or question a belief system or explore a new idea, then that is worth it for me. So I feel like from kind of a redemptive standpoint, we all have these life phases and these experiences. And I feel like if I can share my experiences and it can help others, as I've had people share with me and I've been touched or impacted or improved as a human, then there's a um, redemptive aspect. And so really elevating what's possible and helping people, helping organizations grow and have opportunity to grow. And so how that relates to Enclave is, I've spent a lot of my life looking for peer networks and looking for community. And I could get bits and pieces, right? I've been part of entrepreneurial groups, and those have been great, and I've learned a ton. I have some great friends and contacts from those. And I would rub up against challenges where maybe I was dealing with a family dynamic challenge or something as it related to a tough decision for me, but that was perceived by people as like, it doesn't really matter, you're rich, so even if it fails, who cares, right? But I was grappling with my own experience of that. So with Enclave, it's really all about creating peer network community for individuals who have this lived experience and a place to talk about the experience of wealth, not the mechanics of wealth. So this is not a philanthropy focused group. This is not sponsored by banks. We are very independent, ruthlessly independent, because we don't want sponsors. We're not looking for wealth managers or anyone to infiltrate the space. Highly, strong non-solicitation. This is not a deal-making space. We recognize that as friendships grow and people do things, that yes, people will go off and potentially collaborate or do investments together, but that's not the focus. And so it's really for us, by us. So Mark, my partner in Enclave, we met over 10 years ago, serving on a Merrill Lynch next gen client advisory board. That's a mouthful, but Mark married in to wealth, so he had a unique experience to mine. And what we realized through that process is we knew we were both signing up to go get pumped for information from the top brass at Merrill Lynch, right? We were willing to do that because there was nowhere else in our life that we could spend breakfast, lunch, and dinner with our peers and talk about things as it related to our family wealth or the situation we're in. And that was everything, right? How do you find purpose? Like, I don't have to work, but I know meaningful work is a really important part of human thriving, and contribution is incredibly important for us as humans, whether we're paid for that or not. How do I raise my kids in this environment, right? Like, my parents didn't know, because this is their first time going through this process, just like it's my first time going through this process. And so how do we navigate doing this well with our children? And so we went year after year. Mark and I we were both fathers. We're both into endurance sports. We both love the outdoors. We're both, growers and builders. And so fast forward, we both had kind of been looking for these conversations in places that they just weren't happening. And I remember Mark and I spent a hour hiking at his event. He has an event called 29029 Everesting. And so you hike the equivalent of the height of Everest. You ride the gondola down. It's all about community. It's not a race. It's an amazing experience. And so Mark and I hiked a lap, just the two of us. And at the end of it, and we hadn't seen each other in person for 5 or 6 years. At the end of it, he looked at me and said, "Jake, I just shared more with you than I can talk about with my best friends, my YPO group, or my business partners." We were just talking about this part of our life, right? And that stuck with me, and it was kind of like, yeah, I so did I. And fast forward, I approached him and said, "Hey, we can't be the only two people who have been seeking this and who are looking to navigate this really well, but just don't have access to the resources or the conversations that we're wanting to have. And so if it doesn't exist, what if we create it?" And so that's really, and it's funny because I've had this idea for 7, 8, 9 years. It never really materialized. And now looking back, I can see I wasn't ready for it to materialize, right? I had additional heartache, pains, learnings, things that I needed to get clear on for myself before I would be ready to actually fill this role of being someone who can create the safe space and the vulnerability to bring people together. And so that's how Enclave came to be, and how it's different, you know, from specifically like Nexus or some of these other organizations, which you know are wonderful organizations. We don't view those as competitive. We view all those as kind of additive to what we're doing, because what nobody is doing is really focusing on the human experience of this. And so we don't want it to be business focused or philanthropy focused or impact investing focused, because we want individuals like Misty, my wife, who is living through this experience, who's been an incredible mother, who recently has been pursuing her own passions as our kids are growing older, doing going back to esthetician school, and now she's doing a lot of photography. We want school teachers. We want stay-at-home parents who are focused on raising their children. We want a very diverse group of individuals, and I think the diversity is really really important, right? This is like a niche of a niche of a niche, and so as much diversity as we can get within that is just going to be so fruitful for the conversations, the perspectives, and ultimately the sharing. Like a lot of people carry a lot of guilt and a lot of shame around this experience, and one way to work through that is to talk about it, right? And to have a place to talk about it without judgment, where somebody afterwards can come put their arm around you and say, "Oh my gosh, what you said, like that was my experience. Like, so cool that you shared that." And so that's what we're really after with Enclave, and it's aligned, with me perfectly in that vein of kind of purpose of really elevating what's possible, and using my life experiences and my natural way of being and showing up as vulnerable and empathetic as a way to invite others into that space. And as you were talking about therapy in your 20s, I had to chuckle because I've that at our last event in November, there was one of our members who's in his probably mid to late 20s, shared with me that he's like, Jake, I like after being with you this weekend, I realized like I need to start doing some inner work and kind of lean in to my journey and whatever that is, coaching, therapy, a retreat, meditation. And that was really, really happy moment for me, because those are the types of outcomes that I want to see people have from their experience with Enclave.
I love the flow we're having. It's a perfect segue into yeah, the last chapter of today's conversation, and then we just stay in line. I personally love the word legacy. Let's see if you can identify with the word legacy. I think I think we all are to a certain extent afraid of our own mortality, even after whatever, a quarter of a century me meditating and copious amounts of plant medicine that people can explore in other podcasts. I would say there comes a certain humility to the human experience. I'm mid-40s. I know you're a little bit younger, and we know now we're like in the peak of our lives. Body's still healthy. We did some inner work. We needed to polish the edges of that, shiny being that we are. And I really have been working very consciously for my legacy. If I will achieve it, I have no bloody idea. But when I look at the state of the planet at large, and people ask me, why are you doing what you're doing, Alistair? I mean, you could earn like easier money and chill more and work less. I'm saying I'm doing that really from a transpersonal perspective. I really have sometimes the feeling the unborn generations, meaning the children of your children, the children of the children of your children, or the next 7 generations, like blah, 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 seemingly all the indigenous traditions take into account, which is not true, but many do. It's like to think in larger time spans. And I want to explore in that last chapter where you sense your own legacy, your contribution from a place of joy, that place where your unique cosmic address of wealth, but also this like deep yearning in your heart for finding your tribe and co-conspiring with them. What does an authentic, vulnerable space mean to meet beyond prejudice? And even if you plan that consciously, like almost the maximum of being non-transactional, but recognize, as you have been mentioning, the deeper the bonds are, people may do deals. It's like, I wonder, what is your legacy? And since I've been using that framework very often, if you could use the Horizon 1, 2, 3 model for that. And I don't mind so much what of it is personal and what of it is connected to Enclave. But when I sense through this human being that I only met 3 months ago, and we're having this like deep conversation about the human experience, what is it that you want to manifest? Where do you see your lever, and how do you hope that will unfold in the next years and decades in your biography? Really curious to listen into that.
Yeah, no, it's a good question, and is part of, I recently turned 40, and I've been kind of sitting with this question. How do I make the largest impact in the next 20 years? Right? I've got over 20 years marriage. My daughter's 18, 20 years career. And it's like, as we do in these developmental stages, right, we start asking different questions. Right, in my 20s, the question may have been more around like, how do I make the most amount of money I can in the shortest period of time, right? And so now, fast forward, as I mature and evolve and adapt, I'm very much asking these questions. And I also think about legacy, and I hear the term legacy all the time, right? When you're in the wealth industry, and when you're in the family planning industry, and when you're in the family office space, it's all about legacy, right? Um, it's interesting because, unfortunately, there's a lot of very unconscious toxic legacies being left behind, and whether that's individual members, family systems, or even the structures we live in currently with the world, there's a lot of toxic unconscious things that are happening. So when I think of it, for me, it's really being intentional. It's thinking about, maybe more of a virtuous legacy. Like, at the end of the day, when this life is over, whether that's later today or 50 years from now, or 60 years, who knows, right? Where technology and health goes. I think what matters is how people feel around you, right? And how people learn and grow, because of you, not from a place of pride, or look at how great I am, but from the mentorship, the advising, the willingness, like we have multiple times, to just hop onto calls and talk through various ideas and connect dots. And so I think that, that ties into what I believe, which is because of the situation of having generational wealth, right? Or eventually having more access to generational wealth. Individuals like me, individuals who fit the membership base of Enclave, if done well, we have an outsized opportunity to have a really positive ripple effect into the world, right? And whatever that might be, that's unique to each individual, right? For some, that's philanthropy. For some, that's building schools. For others, that's helping communities or providing services for underprivileged individuals. But beyond the financial wealth, right, we have incredible social wealth and networks. We have access to learning, education, knowledge. We have spiritual aspects of capital, and all those things, in my mind, feel like a bit of a responsibility, right, for me to play this hand to the best of my ability. Not so much that it over pressurizes me and I'm obsessive about it and I lose focus of my kids and my presence and all those things. But there is a sense that I carry around that of, how do I make that impact in a positive way? And ultimately, at the end of all this, nobody cares about your bank account, right? And what I most want out of all of this, right? And what I hope I've done is I really hope that my children will speak positively about how I made them feel, and how I guided them, and helped helped support them in the unique individuals that they are, and the value that they naturally add, just for being who they are. So I'll end there, because that's ultimately what matters to me.
I don't know if it's my closing words, but I want to share my closing words with a practice that I do daily, which is prayer. And it feels very natural. So I'm very touched by the authentic and vulnerable exchange ever since we met. And the prayer that I want to send out into the universe ties into this, I think you said outsized leverage or something like that. Ever since the year 1648, we're in the biggest wealth transition in history. It's like totally unprecedented, the amount of wealth that gets handed down. It's the multiples of the G7 states. It's just like insane amounts of wealth. And what I hope is that besides some of the toxic legacies, that also happen. It's much like in Star Wars, good side of the force, bad side of the force. Most of it is gray. So to not stay in this like analogy of like these simple movies or Dune, is I hope that there's an aspiration and a wish to heal. Even more so when I sense these big burdens and these additional antennas that people of wealth need to put up and protect themselves, just not to get robbed. And there's a prayer for nature and preserving nature. And there's a prayer to experiment with new ways of investing and preserving wealth that goes beyond the, let's just call them traditional wealth advisors from traditional, well-established, advisory companies. Because what we need is a lot of experimentation. We as humanity, we're in uncharted territory as a species. And we have not yet made the leap towards a planetary civilization ahead. And wealth and privilege and power and lever and status compounds. This is the ancient old history. It doesn't really matter that we make this experience in capitalism and mass extinction and like all these compounding crises. But I mean, in the medieval ages or in the times before Jesus Christ or the pharaohs, well, status, lever, power, this all compounds. So there's a big prayer basically from me to you into Enclave and people like you, much like Seth Godin says, that if it's then me or somebody else or Indy Johar or whomever, that I think has some valuable ideas to share, that there's a zest for at least a fraction of the wealth. Doesn't really matter what percent or 5% or so, to really put them into experimenting and really finding out, are there smarter, more clever ways than like single point optimization, or this is just whatever, poverty reduction, or this is for biodiversity. I really think the next jump comes to a systemic level, an ecosystemic level, where we perceive our actions are always having ripple effects within a complex adaptive system, a society, an industry segment, and so forth. I think that's kind of the spontaneous prayer that I want to share. With that, I close my words, Jake. I'm grateful that we're still getting to know each other. I'm really grateful because I was asking you, hey, I know some people that hold wealth. I never had a conversation about specifically wealth and prejudice and all of that. So thanks for daring to show up on my podcast. And yeah, happy to hand over for some closing words. But from my side, I really just feel grateful for the conversation, Jake.
Yeah, well, thank you, Alistair. Really enjoyed our conversation, as I always have, and really appreciate your openness and willingness to kind of touch on a topic that may be a bit taboo in culture, and love the conversation, and look forward to continuing the conversation. And you did a wonderful job creating space, and super appreciative that you invited me on.
Thanks so much, Jake.
Thank you.